Good morning. Thank you all for coming to the VC panel. We know you have a choice in conferences, and we're glad you selected this one to be able to show. I'm Eric Goldberg. I've been in the games industry since dinosaurs roamed the internet, first as a game designer, then as a startup guy, and lastly as an advisor or board member to venture-backed companies. Exits have included Playdom to Disney, PlaySpan to Visa, and Pixelberry to Nexon. So I'm now working, obviously P is the right letter of the alphabet, so I'm now working with Playable Worlds, in which Bitkraft is invested. The panelists, we have an unusually distinguished set of panelists. They are all VCs who raised funds in 2019. So the good news for those of you is they haven't spent it all, and they all come out of the games industry. So as two of them observed, if they ask stupid questions, they will ask informed stupid questions. In any event, just to give you some background, on your left and on your left, far left, is Paul Murphy, who is a general partner of Northzone. Paul was previously head of Dots, which had the best-selling and globally successful mobile game, and now is at Northzone, where his investments include Bunch as a seed co-investor and Clang as a Series A lead investor. Next to him is Malte Barth, a founding partner of Bitkraft Esports Ventures. Malte was previously head of ESL, the very successful esports firm that was sold to MTG. Malte's investments and his partner's investments include Manticore, Network Next, and Venn. Next to him is David Gardner, who is a general partner at London Venture Partners. David was one of the very first employees at Electronic Arts, a startup that seems to have done well in the intervening 35 years. And you headed the European office, correct? London Venture Partners is now on its third funds, and their recent high-profile companies include Hadean, Bunch, and Singularity 6. And then next to him is Ian Livingstone, co-founding partner of Hero Capital. Ian is British games history. He is co-author of the Final Fantasy game books, a founder of Games Workshop, and more recently in Hero Capital, his investments include Flavorworks and Live. In any event, these gentlemen are going to cover, starting with the first question, which is, what are venture capitalists looking for in game companies? Now, there's a difference over here between game companies that may be perfectly viable in the marketplace and those that are venture-worthy. So, David, you've had the most experience with seed. Can you start by some of the criteria that you require to be able to look at a company?
Sure. To look, but I guess you mean to invest. If you're trying to get into the mind of, when an investor wants to actually kind of write the check or wire the money, I think it definitely, for me at least, has changed over time. Some of my early investments have been because you may really like the people and you believe in what they're doing and you want to support the effort. And as LVP has developed, and we have other people's money now in addition to our own that we're investing in and things. So we're trying to have a kind of level of return that makes sense for a venture fund. So if you Eric was, I think, alluding to the fact that you can have a profitable lifestyle business that's a really great business and it's what you want to do, and that's fantastic. But it may not have the kind of profile to do venture-sized returns. So, one rule of thumb is if you put $1 in, you need to get at least $10 back. So if you're in a particularly small market niche, that's fun and healthy for what your team size is, and you're profitable and you can operate great. But if it's not going to become more, if you're starting something at a $5 million valuation, you have to believe this company is going to be worth $50 million in 5 to 10 year kind of time frame. So that's kind of one financial filter, but it's super hard to forecast those things. Startups, et cetera. Supercell is a famous investment story from us, but honestly, when we invested, we did not know they were going to be worth $6 billion one day and then trade to Tencent for 10 billion. I mean, it was not anywhere in our mind. We just knew that the team were hardworking, they had a lot of smart ideas, they were very systematic. They had an experienced team. I'd say experience is pretty useful. First-time entrepreneurs, yes, but you usually have a lot of experience from the games industry, something that kind of builds that credibility. But product, you might think, is going to be really important. Actually, for me, as I've gone on, product is less important. That's an expression of you and your team, but it doesn't have to necessarily line up with what I think is going to be a success. The market will tell you that. So I actually put product lower down and team really high up on top.
Okay, let's talk about sectors. Malte, when Bitkraft was started as a seed fund of around 20 million, it was Bitkraft Esports and focused on one sector. Now that you are a $140 million fund, you've diversified into other sectors. Are there some particular sectors that are hot, or the areas that are of most interest to you?
Yeah, so for us, esports is a bit of a lighthouse, a pinnacle that essentially guides us the way of next-gen entertainment per se, and we see a lot of things being driven by esports, and that we take advantage of with our founders to actually go in and take esports and then branch out from there. So there's a lot of interesting technologies being built out of the games universe, which changed the landscape of entertainment, and we sort of look at this the same way for esports, whether it comes to live streaming or 3D simulation engines or big data streaming services, etc. And this is essentially where we try to identify investments which really tailor to esports at large, and then drive out in other addressable market sizes. Give you one example: we invested in a haptics company called Lofeld, a deep tech company out of Berlin, which enables essentially a new sensory dimension of the internet. So internet now being largely visual and to some degree auditory, and they enable a technology that adds another layer on top of the sensory sensations. And that, yes, we go in, and that company goes in after gaming and esports per se, but obviously this is in the process of being applied into cars, it's applied into mobile phones, it's applied into other devices, including everything you touch in a connected world. And that is obviously pretty beautiful because we can drive it with esports, build the lighthouse, and then scale it in much different verticals.
Can you quickly touch on your non-esports investments, because you've now made a number of them?
So I guess we don't really have a full non-esports investment. So a few cases in a very early day, it is sometimes very hard to state whether that will ever be esports. It may become esports, or started esports and then branched it a little bit out. So give you one example. There's an amazing team out of San Diego which built a technology that lets essentially the community in a no-code world build their own application, including games. And games is a strong proposition to go after, but essentially it enables an entire new generation to very easily build their tools, build their own digital experience, and share that with friends. So it's Go Meta out of San Diego, and yes, that is to some degree our thesis is the community in esports. They want to build their own stuff. They want to build their own esports, right? And the tool enables that for esports and games, but it's obviously way bigger. So it's sort of borderline. It started out to be esports and then branched out into a more general no-code proposition for millennials, if you so wish, and said that you can sort of argue whether it's like esports or not.
Okay, thank you, Malte. Let's go to Ian, who has done what appear to be more traditional investments, and now you can contradict me and tell me why they're completely wild and crazy studios. But can you tell us briefly about what drives you in terms of the investments you're looking for?
Yes, I mean, of course, I agree with David that VCs are looking to make multiples on their investment. But for me, the most important thing are, two things: the team and also the game. There are so many, I mean, there are over 2,000 game studios in the UK. Not all of them are always business investor ready. And what I look for, and I think we have a shining example within this room, is a great creative on an equal footing with a great business leader. And that partnership will help get them through, which is a very tricky landscape navigating the very competitive games world. So I'm going to have to embarrass them there at the back of the room there, but Playdemic, who I invested in as a seed investor, created Golf Clash, you may know, hugely successful game, monetizing north of over $100 million per annum, without disclosing actual numbers. But they had a team where Paul Gu's CEO understood the business of games and was able to assemble a great team, but he was on an equal footing with the creative director, Alex, is at the back, who was able to create a great team. And so they understood not just the game development, how to make it a compelling experience, but how to scale architecture, to be able to self-publish to a global market, and understanding that this, if you are to scale, it needs financing. And so, for me, that is absolute number one requisite. Not just the creative person, because a lot of creative people can't actually run a Barth, and myself included, I would say sometimes, but need to understand the business of the industry. So, for me, there's a kind of multiple things I look for. The team, game, because when people say what's the most important thing, I will say gameplay, 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 and the ability to scale. So not being afraid of failure, but failing fast, the usual things we've heard a million times, but they're all important. Having skin in the game, are you personally invested in it? What IP do you actually own? What technology do you actually own? And do you understand what business model do you have as well? So there are multiple things to consider, and they don't really change for me from whether it's an angel investment that I make or as a part of Hero Capital. So with Hero Capital, what we are doing is follow-on funding. We are over prolific in making games in the UK, particularly, and in Europe, but we're under-invested as a sector. So through Hero, we're trying to redress that balance. So we're typically going for the kind of gap funding, the follow-on funding. There's quite a lot of incentives to start a game company in the UK, but that gap funding is yet to be filled. So we're trying to fill the gap between 1 and 3 million for a seed A and 3 and 7 million for a Series B.
Thank you, Ian. Let's go. Everyone who you've heard speak is from an $80 to $140 million fund. Paul represents a $500 million fund, which operates at the next, usually at the next level of takeoff. It also is different in that you are a general investor, that games are only one sector. So what do you look for to decide to invest in games rather than, let's say, a SaaS play?
Yeah, so, I mean, the first thing, we're downstream, so we get to, these guys do the hard work, and then we get to look at the portfolios and then make bets, and we've done that twice, at least since I've been at Northzone with LVP. But I think it is different. So we, all of the Series A funds in Europe, and it's fairly true in the US as well, might have 3 to 5 investments, gaming investments in the portfolio, and that could last sort of 2 to 3 years. So it's not a portfolio approach to gaming, which is how I think if I was going to build a gaming fund, that's how I would approach it. I would say I'm going to back the very best teams in this sort of space that I think is hot. I have no idea what's going to work, but I'm going to back great teams in interesting spaces, and something will pop. For me, it's not enough. I came from, Eric spent a lot of time with us at Dots in New York, and we had recruited, I think, one of the best game teams in the US. Anyone that we wanted, we were able to get to move to New York. We had a game that had 150 million downloads. We were profitable, amazing investors. So all of those as prerequisites was still not enough for a generalist fund like Northzone to come in and maybe lead a Series B for that company. Because you could see a path for that company, maybe a 3 to 5x, but not the sort of 10x that David was talking about. They may still get there, and they're certainly doing great, but I think what we're looking for is something that really has some outlier KPI, something that really just looks very different from all the other studios that we've met. The challenge, and this is why I think it's very difficult to do this stage of investing that Northzone does in gaming, is by the time you find that spiky metric that really is exceptional, usually you don't need our money. You're kind of past that stage. So then you look at doing, large secondary transactions like Index did with Supercell, or has happened in other game studios in the past, and then also you start to question, what value are we providing that's really unique. So it's hard, I guess, is the bottom line. We still have made investments. We mentioned 2. We've also invested in Seriously, which we sold last year, and Space Ape, which is now part of Supercell. So we do make them, but I think generally speaking, what we're doing is we're moving slightly away from content and more focused on platform technology. Now that you've got this really big mature ecosystem in gaming, things that will help power that in the future.
So David observed earlier that most people look for 10x, and 10x on the sort of money that you put in is 40x on the standards that these gentlemen are putting in.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the pre-discussion that one of the things that makes VCs most likely to do things is when there's a platform change. Can you discuss that briefly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the golden time to both start and invest in game studios. So obviously we had the shift over to social web, Facebook. You had Zynga sort of pop out of there. You then had the shift to mobile, and King and Space Ape or Supercell and many others sort of pop from there. And then you had the shift from premium to free to play. And so each of those sort of platform and business model shifts, you could have been a really good team, and you'd catch this phenomenal tailwind that just, rising tides, everyone's going to sort of do well. So those are great times to invest. I think right now, my view is we don't really have one of those happening. I hope maybe you guys can educate me and tell me why I'm wrong. But I think that's why you're seeing a lot of the funds at our size, dial back their gaming investments. And I think you'll see that kind of dial back up again when the next wave or shift starts happening.
So there have been 3 candidates for platform shifts because the VC industry is always looking for them. VR, which has crashed and burned at least for now. It may be a wonderful future, but it's not going to be in the next several years. Esports. Now there's a case of something that is clearly a good business, but is not yet proven as a venture proposition in terms of delivering huge numbers of companies that return. And then most recently, blockchain. For the rest of the 3 of you, do you have candidates, or Malte, do you want to explain why esports is going to have 10 exits in the next 2 years?
For us, I mean, there's a different, obviously very different perspectives to look at esports, right? So there's a very narrow view, which is sort of the predominant view out there in the media, the analysts, and everybody looks at it and takes sports and then translates this into video games, and that is then what people define as esports. It's very different from the way we look at this, because we have a very peripheral view into esports, and we ask ourselves a question, what is it that's going to be driven by this fundamental change of 2 generations, living and breathing and entertainment. This is like this groundswell we're trying to catch with various investments, which to many people out there look sort of awkward because they wonder why is that esports? How is that esports, right? But that enables us to take advantage of this swing of 2 entire generations, totally redefining the landscape of entertainment.
Yes, and actually one of the things that Malte hints at is that there is a huge change, which is spectating. When everyone in this room was growing up, we thought games were interactive. But now in the West, as much as 20% of games are consumed by watching them, by spectating, by people who are 25 and younger. There may be someone who's in that group over here, but it doesn't look like the majority of you are. David, you've taken a fair number of unusual investments. Do you want to talk about your more unusual investments that you think have a high upside?
I will. And also on the platform thing, I think the big the traditional platform changed, PlayStation 3 to 4, 4 to now coming to 5. Mobile, of course, was a massive shift, but it kind of is constantly upgrading, so there's no big step like there has been in the past. So the continuous growth of the market actually provides enormous opportunity. In particular, one of the things I'm excited about is games that are in non-traditional game sectors, so games for girls or things that are going to be expanding the player base, because virtually everyone has access now to a mobile phone. So it's time to get content out for the players that are not well served, and I think you'll find that's an enormous market. One of the long-range things we're investing in is the whole shift with, streaming, of course, is the buzzword because Google's been pumping big money into that space, but I think what it really is talking about is what can you do with all this compute in the cloud, how maybe it's delivered, streaming locally, bifurcated between devices, etc. But it's very exciting to think if you can deliver such incredible experiences that have never been achievable before on the kind of platforms we've had. I think that's exciting. So we're investing in Hadian, which is an operating system for basically doing this enormous compute in the cloud. It's a London-based team working on some really cool stuff. We've been investing in the social space. Paul mentioned Bunch. It's kind of bringing a different social layer for people to play together and have fun and communicate and build new friendships. So I just sort of see this gaming layer going throughout all of our normal activities. And the generational shift I was also going to bring up, what I learned from esports isn't so much the arena-based head-to-head combat, which is exciting and thrilling, but it's the viewership aspect. It's the massive growth in how people consume games as less active participants.
So can you just briefly highlight one or two of the things that will be game changers, pun unfortunately intended, for cloud gaming? In other words?
Well, I think when cloud gaming is able to deliver an experience that nothing else can deliver, so therefore enormous compute, simulation, even graphical fidelity is done at the cloud side and then is delivered to you on whatever your client device is. I think that's going to be a really exciting moment. And of course, the social side of everyone being connected.
Yeah, if you have a good connection, you essentially have more computing power than anyone has, and it's the equivalent of having a supercomputer.
Yeah.
Ian, what interesting frontiers are you looking at?
Well, clearly, same as these guys, platforms as well, but there's another area that we're looking at is data. Games and sports are throwing off huge amounts of data, which you're being able to monetize. Look the way Google recently bought Fitbit for £2 billion. So we're looking at companies that are aggregating data and being able to monetize that.
And so for those of you who are unfamiliar about the value of data, that's essentially where Google lives. There is Cathy O'Neill's wonderful Weapons of Math Destruction, M-A-T-H Destruction, which describes just how data is used. It's a scary book, but it also tells you why these gentlemen are chasing enormous data opportunities. What about in games? Are there genres that you see that have been underexplored? For example, storytelling games were underexplored for a number of years, and then episode and choices came out, and obviously you've invested in Flavorworks. Are there other sectors that you think are back on the rise or coming back?
Well, I think branching narrative has got a huge upside if it's done well. I think Bandersnatch proved that. Netflix were very happy, but I mean, essentially, there wasn't that many choices available to it. But a lot of companies are moving into branching narrative. I mean, there's always a huge uptake in any new concept that comes out in games, and they're always successful. I mean, as you quite rightly pointed out, VR is still a bit of a false dawn. It's been around for decades, but it's not until it becomes a pair of, still very clunky, until it becomes a pair of Oakleys that all people begin to take it seriously. It becomes not a hassle to actually experience, and not people being shut off from the world entirely. But there's always new games concepts coming up, and being a gamer myself, I'm always playing a huge amount of games and looking for the next opportunity. But yeah, I'm sure if there's anyone in this room who's got some great ideas, there'll be some people here who'll be delighted to listen to your new ideas. The thing is, we've seen a 350 opportunities in the last few months. We've only put 3 investments down, but it's for every angry birds, there's probably 10,000 dead birds out there. So the message is, don't be a Me Too company.
All right. Now, in one of the pre-discussions, we talked about many entrepreneurs just want their VC not to cause damage. Let's give these gentlemen a chance to tell you about how VCs can add value. Why is working with a VC who has operational games experience going to give advantage to a venture-backed company? Let's see. Ian or David have been doing it the longest so far.
Well, I'd like to think we've accumulated some knowledge that we can then pass on to the people we're investing in and help them avoid falling into easily made mistakes. So it's not just a question of giving money, it's being able to give business advice, games design advice, advice on the market. There are multiple ways which we can add value and help scale their businesses in the most risk-free way. I mean, it's so easy to make a million mistakes. I made so many mistakes in the early days of Games Workshop and never thought they would become a £2 billion company today, which it is. So, it's choosing your exit point. It's quite careful. But we should also, I'd like to think we can add a lot of value in multiple ways.
Yeah, well, I like to say that I have a 35-year repertoire of spectacular mistakes I and my peer group have made that you want to avoid, so we can enable you to make all new mistakes. Paul, at a later stage, how can a VC be helpful, or do you just try and get out of the way?
Yeah, I mean, my approach is to mostly get out of the way. And I think that any sort of credible investor is going to be able to connect a founder to whoever they want to speak to. So I think that the Rolodex is good and useful, but not. I don't think all that differentiated relative to other VCs. But to me, what I think of is, and it happens, it's so amazing. I've been doing this job now full-time for 2.5 years, and it's the late sort of Saturday night phone call that I get from a founder. And I think I've been there. The nights that I can't sleep, I'm up at 2 a.m. multiple times a week. Having sort of true empathy and understanding what that person is going through, help just giving them an outlet to talk about it, I think is where, of all the things that I've done, just actually being quiet and listening, I think is where I've added the most value to my founders. So I think that's one. And then I think the other bit is it is helpful, I feel like, for especially gaming founders to have a peer group that they can talk to. And so what we try to do is get as many of our companies to share best practices and experiences as possible.
Yeah, I would jump on that because we've done 35 investments, and that community of people in the portfolio are so great to each other. That was something I didn't really think about in the beginning, but now I see spectacular benefits of people sharing, supporting, trying to work things out together. So we've realized, okay, we need to contribute to helping organize events around learning on whatever the key topic is, whether it's growth or hiring, or so we have regular founder calls where we every month go through topics that people love, and that's one of the really cool things about the portfolio.
And on our end, since we a bit more narrow in focus, and we as team, we've been operator and founder in this space, and we touched, I think, 60 companies in esports, and so I think we have a very unique view in depth in the industry and see what's moving. So it's really hard for us to miss things, and we actively share with our founders to directionally shift, left, right, and see where the big movements really are. And you can also tell that half of our deals are off-market deals, so we typically bank on relationships we had for a long time, and that is very deep trust we start with, typically our founders, and then yes, we're not over our founders, but we're super actively connected. If there's anything we can be helpful, that is to a large degree also recruiting. So we know people and we know who could be a great fit, guys we worked with in the past. We see teams performing or like having issues in certain areas. Super easy for us to make connections because we got an operator mindset, all 3 GPs being founders and operators ourselves. And that is super important. And the other thing is that when it comes to esports, we as a team, we to a large degree built the ecosystem over the last 20 years. And that helped us a lot to have a view on how the ecosystem evolves, and then plugging in helping to plug the founders and the teams back into that ecosystem in the right way and
Malte,
connect them.
I'm sorry, we're running out of time, so I have to wrap up. So the advantages that you bring are operational experience, the ability to connect, but also John Doerr of Kleiner Perkins, the most successful VC of his generation, said what Paul said, being therapists, being people who listen, who deal with the lonely at the top, because all of you entrepreneurs are building something from nothing. With that, for questions, we're going to be outside the room. If you want to ask questions, they'll be there for about 5 minutes. In the meantime, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank Paul, Malte, David, and Ian for sharing their knowledge. Thank you so much.